Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the kind introduction. So, I'm going to speak in the next 20 minutes about supporting victims of crime. Now, from time to time, the psychiatrist will get referrals from the court for a medico-legal assessment of victims of crime. So, I will try to highlight some of the areas that you should pay attention to in this field. Now, victims were more or less a forgotten entity until 2015. Before that, the judiciary emphasis was focused mainly on the perpetrator. And victims were only involved as witnesses. But in 2015, a new act came into operation. The Act number 4 of 2015, which is the act named as the Assistance to and Protection of Victims of Crime and Witnesses. And in this act, the victims the importance of victims was brought forward, and for the very first time, a victim was defined in this act. And it is interesting and it is important for all the psychiatrists to know this broad definition of a victim. Victim is not only the primary victim. Primary victim is the person directly affected by the crime. According to this act, there are some secondary victims. So in your report or in your mental assessment report, you need to pay not only attention to the primary victim, which is the obvious thing, but also look at the secondary victims. So who are these secondary victims? Secondary victims, according to this act, are even a person who comes for the assistance of the victim at the time of the crime. That person can also be a victim in that crime, a secondary victim. Then a parent or guardian will be also named as a secondary victim. Family member, any family member or dependents, as well as a person who has a significant importance to the primary victim. So this will include a boyfriend or a girlfriend. So when you are assessing and writing reports, please pay attention to these secondary victims as well, because that also will enhance the support given to the victim. First, I will deal with the harm to victims. Harm to victims can be classified under primary, secondary, and tertiary. And it is usually the primary harm that is well known. The other two are not well known. Now, the primary harm is the harm due to a victim due to the direct result of the crime. It is due to the direct result of the crime, which is usually taken into account. But there are two other types of harms, the secondary and the tertiary harm. Now, what is secondary harm? Secondary harm can be due to three reasons. One, the harm due to the police investigations itself. You know, when a crime is committed, a police investigation takes place. And this investigation leads to the victim having to recall the traumatic incident over and over again, sometimes even to visit the crime site, scene of crime, and repeated interrogations by the police. That itself can be a traumatic experience. In Sri Lanka, generally people don't like visiting the police station. So having to visit the police station itself may be a traumatic event for the person. Secondary harm can also be due to the medical examination. You know, Usually victims are referred to the medical side for a report, and the medical examination may consist of several doctors examining, including the judicial medical officer. And in all these instances, the victim has to again recall the event over and over again, and also undergo medical examination of the parts of the body, which can be very embarrassing. And so that can also lead to re-traumatizing the victim. So that is also a part of the secondary harm. The third secondary harm is the harm that occurs during the court procedures. You know, the victim is usually the first witness in the prosecution. And this witness, the victim has to now relate the story all over again. Now in public, the court cases are heard in public. And sometimes it can be very embarrassing for the victim to recount the details, especially with regard to a sexual assault. And also, in the courthouse, there is another problem that a victim will face. That is the cross-examination. Now, in the police investigation and in the medical examination, we tend to take the victim's story as it is. But when it comes to the court procedures, the victim has to undergo a vigorous cross-examination by the defense counsel. And this cross-examination aim is to actually cast doubts on the victim's story. And that can also be a traumatic experience. Then we have the tertiary harm, which is again not very well recognized. The tertiary harm is due to the media publicity. You know, in the media, crime cases are given a prominent place because they have a high news value according to the media people. So, and the media, what we call unresponsible reporting of the media might damage the patient. I have seen victims who have been school children, whose names have been published in the media. Media includes the print media, the electronic media, as well as the social media, where the person's identity is revealed, even the school is revealed, and they find very difficult to go back to school. And they might have faced stigma and discrimination from their own friends, from the parents in the school, from the teachers. Just imagine a sexually assault schoolgirl getting pregnant. Now that girl will not be allowed to go to school, and her education will be entirely disrupted for no fault of her. And these are things that we need to consider when we are considering assessment report for a medico-legal purpose. So that is the tertiary harm. Again, not very well documented most of the time. Moving on, I will then speak about the impact of the crime. Now the impact is of fourfold: the physical impact, the emotional, financial, and the indirect impact. Now the physical impact is the distress, damage, disability, dysfunction, death, all starting with the letter D, so easy to remember. But remember, even the physical impact will have psychological implications. So that is something that you need to remember. Now, in addition to the physical impact, you know the emotional impact of the crime itself, the shock, the fear, the anger, shame, self-blame, and also leading to low self-esteem, and sometimes leading to substance abuse, and also suicidal behavior, and sometimes ending up in suicide. So these are all the emotional impact that you need to think of when you are making an assessment. The financial impact, again, it's very important, the economic aspects, firstly due to loss of revenues, and also the increased expenditure. So in certain cases, these are also facts that you need to highlight in the report so that the victim will get adequate compensation, because this particular Act, 2015 Act, gives the victim the opportunity to claim compensation. I'll come to that in a minute. So it's very important that you assess these areas as well. Then you have the indirect impact. Now, until this Act came, none of the family or the friends or the community were involved in the, they were not taken as victims, but they suffer, as all of you know. But in this Act now, the family and the friends, especially a special friend, can be involved. This Act does not permit the community to be involved, but I know in certain other countries like South Africa, even the community members can be involved as secondary victims. So it is important that you pay attention, especially to the family and any special relationship that the victim had. Now, supporting victims are based on 4 guiding principles. The first one is the right to be treated with respect and compassion. So all victims have a right to be treated with respect and compassion. Non-discrimination, no discrimination at all should be done, including the age should not be a prohibition for participation in the process of justice. Third one is the best interest of the victim, which includes the right to effective assistance. So victims will need assistance and they have a right to get their assistance. Right to privacy, very important, privacy, and right to safety. In fact, this Act provides victims to be provided safety. The Act goes on to say that victims can be even given a new name, new identity, and can be even relocated, even outside Sri Lanka. This Act gives provisions for that. And right to participate. Now, that includes right to be informed, right to be heard and express views and concerns, and right to reparation. So all these are now regarded as important when we come to assist victims. Now, there are 4 categories of victims. All victims are not the same. There are 4 categories. And let me introduce them. The first category is the victims of serious crimes, which includes domestic violence, hate crime. All these crimes are quite common in Sri Lanka. So these are the victims of serious crimes. The second group is the persistently targeted victims. That is, a victim being repeatedly victimized. Targeted repeatedly over a period. So the crime occurring over and over again. So a good example would be a victim of domestic violence, which keeps on going repeatedly. Then you have the vulnerable victims. Child victim is always a vulnerable victim. A victim with a mental disorder. A victim with an intellectual disability. And even victim with a physical disability. Now, I remember I had to give evidence in High Court's Matara, where I was called to testify the testimonial capacity, that is the capacity to give evidence in a mentally retarded and a deaf and dumb victim. She had been sexually assaulted and she could not speak. And even the sign interpreter could not understand her speech. And the courts wanted me to testify that. So sometimes you may be called upon to testify. So these are all vulnerable victims. And of course the intimidated victims. Now this is again a very important category. victims of family violence. The crime itself occurs within the family, and they are victims of that violence, the family violence. Then student victims. Now, presently there is a student in my own university who has become a victim because the authorities are trying to get the student to remove the complaint given to the police using their authority. So students are also intimidated, they come under intimidated victims. Then you have the political victims. Again a very interesting category of victims. And of course, employment-related victims. So all these people can be influenced by authority figures, and that can actually result in certain problems facing the victims. Finally, what is the role of the psychiatrist when providing support to a victim? There are a few things that I would like to mention. The standard of care for victims of crime. So your role would be to ensure fair treatment, treat the victims with respect, compassion, and provide all the support that you can give from your point of view. That is something very important. When you write a report, a medical legal assessment report, it should be a comprehensive report. A comprehensive report should include the type of harm, especially mentioned about the primary, secondary, and the tertiary harm that the victim has faced. Then the category of victim, the 4 categories that I have mentioned. It's important to highlight certain vulnerable victims, and also the impact of the crime on the victim, because all these are important in order to for the victim to get what we call a compensation. Now in this act, it provides the victim to ask for compensation from the courts. When an accused is convicted of the crime, before the sentencing takes place, the victim is given an opportunity to make what is called a victim impact statement. Now in this victim impact statement, there should be medical evidence showing the damage, the medical damage, physical or psychological, which will also enable the person to claim compensation. So this is usually submitted by the victim, and in this victim impact statement you have to mention about the impact of the crime, and in this act maximum compensation of 1 million rupees can be paid to the victim, in addition to any other penalties that is given to the convicted accused. So for the victim to obtain this compensation, a victim impact statement must be given, and there it has to be mentioned about these various areas of impact resulting as a result of the crime. So be mindful of that, and when you are submitting a report, please mention about the victim impact as well. Thank you.